welcome back to NewsX World. I'm Kriti Mehta and you're watching Focal Length, where we get you a briefing on topics from across the world. Now, as global tension rises, immigration policies have become a hot topic in both the US and Australia. In the US, President Trump's crackdown, ranging from visa restrictions to ICE raids, faces growing criticism. How can he balance national security concerns with the demands of his base? Meanwhile, in Australia, events like the Bondi Beach shooting prompt a re-evaluation of immigration laws. With rising geopolitical competition, how should Australia position itself as a security anchor in Oceania? And is foreign policy now inseparable for national security and social cohesion? To discuss this, joining us now is Salvatore Babones, an American sociologist based in Australia and a leading commentator on global politics, security and international relations. Professor Babones has written extensively on geopolitics, democracy and the Indo-Pacific strategic order and is currently based in Sydney. Professor Babones, thank you for joining us on Focal Length. And I'll start by my first question. Do you think President Donald Trump has faced increased criticism over his immigration crackdown, whether it's curbs on H-1B or other visas, ICE raids, or curbing migrants from 12 countries of concern? How do you think he can balance not upsetting his MAGA campaign critics while also tackling the challenges that come with immigrants who've not gone through the legal vetting process?
There are really three separate issues at play in U.S. immigration policy. One is the sheer number of illegal immigrants who were allowed in under the Biden administration in the last 4 years that Donald Trump has pledged to reverse and is doing a lot of work to reverse. And so when we hear about ICE raids, that's mainly to do with illegal immigration. Now, people in the rest of the world seem to feel that the United States is being unwelcoming by deporting illegal immigrants, but of course, every other country in the world also deports illegal immigrants. I'm an American, but I'm speaking to you from Australia, which has a zero tolerance policy for illegal immigrants who are actually held in offshore detention in much harsher conditions than the U.S. Illegal immigrants to the United States face. So that's the first issue. And I don't think there can really be any international controversy over this, since every country in the world restricts its immigration to people coming in through legal paths. The second issue is the H-1B visa program. Now, that program is crucial to U.S. technology leadership, and of course, the largest number of people coming in on that visa are Indians. That said, the visas have in recent years been overused. That is, the purpose of the program is to give visas to people who have specialized skills that can't be found in the United States. But again, in recent years, tech companies have simply used them to bring in large numbers of programmers at lower wages than programmers who are coming out of U.S. universities. So that is to say, the H-1B visa program has come to be abused. So the idea that there will be some scale back in the H-1B visa program is entirely appropriate. Now, that may not be very popular among Indians who want to go to the U.S. to work there, but again, it's an entirely appropriate reform. Now, what form that reform will take, that is, whether it's appropriate to have a salary minimum for H-1B visa or actually to have tech companies pay a $100,000 fee to show that they really need this employee, one way or another, the goal is correct. That is, the goal is to ensure that only genuinely in-demand individuals are brought in via the H-1B visa program, not just a large pool of programmers at lower wages than can be hired in the United States. The third issue is the most controversial, which is to limit immigration from countries that the U.S. considers high risk, and these are overwhelmingly Muslim-majority countries. Now, that issue has to do with the U.S. immigration program in general, because unlike virtually any other country in the world, the United States has what's called a visa lottery, meaning that, or a green card lottery, meaning that people from any country in the world can come to the United States if they win this lottery, which is literally a lottery. You put your name in and you hope that you get one of the small number of visas available, but the visas are available to people from every country. Now, most countries restrict their immigration using other means. They don't allow general immigration into the country. And again, that includes Australia, where I am today, which has nothing equivalent to the US green card lottery. In Australia, you can only be allowed in if you meet specific criteria of the government, not just because you won a ticket in a lottery. So while I feel this is the most controversial of the Trump administration moves, it is set up by the fact that the US, unlike other countries, has this very liberal immigration policy. Do I agree with it? Well, in principle, no. I think we shouldn't be choosing people on the basis of what country they come from, but on the basis of who they are. That said, the fact that this policy is being put in place is entirely due to the fact that the US takes immigrants from these countries in the first place, which most other countries don't.
Let's also see the question of immigration from the Australian perspective now. Following the Bondi Beach shooting, do you think Australia needs to reassess its immigration laws, given that Australia follows short-term immigrants to allows them to increase its revenue?
In Australia, the serious problem is short-term visas, mainly issued to international students, but increasingly in recent years also to working holiday visa makers. Now, in other countries, these are typically a small number of visas for genuine. In Australia, the serious problem is short-term visas, mainly issued to international students, but increasingly in recent years also to working holiday visa makers. Now, in other countries, these are typically a small number of visas for genuine students who want to study at their universities. And in Australia, that used to be the case 20 or 25 years ago. But now this has become simply an industry in Australia. I mean, even at the university level, something like 1/3 of all of our students are international students at the school, at the vocational level. That is, people coming to study cooking classes, hospitality classes, English language classes. The numbers are overwhelming. I mean, almost everybody in these programs is an international student. With the result that there's an enormous cohort of international students, between 500,000 and 1 million. It depends what time of year you're looking, but let's say on average about 750,000 international students are in Australia at any one time, and they come in with very little checking. They're checked for their financial capacity to come in study for their first semester in Australia, but beyond that, virtually anybody can come to Australia on an international student visa. The security checks required are purely perfunctory. They're not really deep security checks in any way. And the sheer number of international students means that really, if bad actors want to come into Australia, they can come into Australia via this route. Once in Australia, they can easily stay in Australia by continuing to enroll in course after course after course. And when I say that, I don't mean university after university. I mean cooking certificate after cooking certificate, then get a hairdressing certificate and stay in the country. Now, the Bondi Beach attacks, one of them, the father, was in fact originally admitted into Australia on an international student visa. But I have to stress, he had been in Australia for a quarter century. I mean, he's been in Australia a long time, and his son was actually born in Australia. So these were not people who were terrorists who slipped into the country. These were people who became terrorists while in Australia.
Right.
That is, these are people who lived peaceful lives in Australia for 25 years and then became terrorists. And I think that shows that Australia has a serious problem inside the country. That is, these are not terrorists taking advantage of an easy visa system. These are people who are deciding, after years of living in one of the freest and most pleasant and civilized countries in the world, to engage in terrorism. And that's more a domestic problem for Australia to deal with than it is a visa problem.
All right, Mr. Babones, how do you see the Brown University and Bondi Beach shootings now affecting the dynamics amid the Quad nations?
There is a common thread between the Bondi Beach massacre and the Brown shooting in that both of them involved international students. But the individual situations are extremely different. I mean, an Indian immigrant to Australia from 25 years ago compared to a Portuguese student in the US, these really are not comparable situations. They're really very different. Yes, it sounds similar in that they both involved international students, but one was Muslim, one was Christian, one was from India, one was from Portugal. There's really not much connection between them. Now, that said, the symbolic connection, the fact that politically people will perceive these events that happened close in time to be connected, may drive greater Quad cooperation against terrorism. 3 of the 4 Quad members have a very strong interest in preventing and fighting against terrorist activity. That is to say, the United States, Australia, and India all face international terrorism, and let's just be frank, they all face mostly Islamist terrorism. The Portuguese angle in the US was a very strange angle on that attack. It's not something we would typically expect. That is, terrorism against the United States is overwhelmingly Islamist terrorism, as of course terrorism in India and terrorism in Australia. Now, Japan, of course, has no horse in this race, but Japan is, of the 4 Quad countries, I think the one that is most eager for Quad cooperation. So I suspect that if the 3 other Quad members all want to cooperate on terrorism, I strongly suspect that the Japanese government would go along with that simply because they have a strong interest in keeping the Quad going.
All right. And in your opinion, what role should Australia play as a security anchor for Oceania, especially as great power competition intensifies in the Pacific Islands?
Australia has great potential to be an anchor for security in the Indo-Pacific region, if nothing else than because of its geography. It literally connects the Indian Ocean and the Pacific Ocean, and has, and in a technical level is important because it's not just location. Australia has the industrial infrastructure and the ports infrastructure. It's able to host the most advanced American ships as well as friendly allied ships if they were to come, in a way that other countries in the region might not be capable of or might not be politically willing to do. So it's not just a matter of location, it's a matter of political will and technical capacity. Unfortunately, under the new Labour government of Anthony Albanese, or not really that new, it's been in power for 4 years now, there has been a reluctance to engage with regional security. The Labour government is divided between one group that's often called the Labour right, which would prefer to maintain an alignment with the US, UK, and global liberal English-speaking countries, and a Labour left faction, which would prefer to abandon the US alliance and is very much on the opposite side of these issues, and so is very reluctant to support the Quad, is very reluctant to support international security infrastructure. And that tension is really playing out most of all in policy on Israel, where the Labour Party has been torn apart between a Labour right that believes in global security, anti-terrorism, is very opposed to anti-Semitism in Australia, and a Labour left that is very pro-Hamas, pro-Palestinian, anti-Israel, anti-US, and very tolerant of Hamas terrorism, and in some instances, very extreme instances I have to add, but in some instances has actually welcomed terrorism in Australia. Well, that tension means that the current Australian government is not all in on regional security the way that previous Australian governments might have been. Australia is not going to withdraw from the Quad or withdraw from the US alliance. Nothing extreme like that is going to happen. But things aren't moving forward the way they had been previously because the current Australian government is torn between these two factions, one that supports international security infrastructure, one that is generally opposed to the international security infrastructure, and that leads them into a policy paralysis on regional security.
And in your opinion, is Australia now entering a new era where foreign policy, national security and social cohesion are no longer separate debates, but one single strategic challenge?
In Australia, security policy today is being driven almost entirely by the Arab-Israeli conflict. Now, that's very strange because Australia is very far from the Middle East and has no real historical presence in the Middle East, but there is a hardcore group, mostly within the Labour Party and also within the Greens Party in Australia, that finds it just as absolutely committed to an anti-Israel policy. Now, whether you agree with that or not, there are reasons to oppose Israel's actions in the Middle East. The idea that that should drive Australia's foreign policy and Australia's security agenda is really very strange. But yet domestic political forces related to this, partly due to white Australians, that is non-immigrant Australians who are very opposed to Israel and have been accused in many cases of anti-Semitism, but also a Muslim minority in Australia who, again, not everybody, but a large segment of that Muslim Australian population is strongly opposed to Israel and is strongly in favor of Australia supporting Hamas, or at least giving succor to Hamas in Palestine. Now, as a result, the Labour Party in Australia, which is the current governing party in Australia, has seen its foreign policy driven much more by its internal party dynamics around Hamas versus Israel than it is driven by the global security situation. When it comes to global security, China is the chief threat to Australia, not Israel. Yet the Labour Party is inordinately concerned with Israel and has, if anything, I won't say cozied up to China, but has sought to diminish the tensions between Australia and China. It's avoided causing any trouble when it comes to China, is the way they see it. Well, in that situation, we have this strange environment in which Australian global foreign policy is being driven by the domestic political calculations of the Labour Party. I don't know how long that can continue because it is such a contradiction. Yet that's the situation we're in today in Australia.
Mr. Babones, now finally, you've also written a book on Indian democracy. Please tell us more about that, especially as being an American living in Australia, you're writing that book. What do you think of India's democracy as perceived by the world?
My book on Indian democracy has just been republished in India under the title Democracy with Dharma and is now available in India at Indian prices. It is a quantitative analysis of the quality of Indian democracy, and I have to say the broad conclusion of the book is that Indian democracy is very healthy. And in the book, I unpack why the international indices have had such a negative evaluation of India in the last 10 years, when in fact, India's been doing very well. Now, democracy should be the glue that holds Australia and India together because both have a very similar set of democratic values. Yet in Australia, awareness of India is very low, and awareness of Indian democracy is very low. That's why I wrote the book. I wanted Australians and Americans and people in the rest of the world to understand that India really does have a first-class democracy. India should be accepted into the global network of democratic nations, not because India is anti-China, not because India is strategically valuable, not because India might buy American military equipment, but because India is a fellow democracy. And that's a message that Indians have not been sufficiently successful at getting out to the rest of the world. It's what I'd like to do with the book. The book has sold reasonably well internationally, but now Indians have the opportunity to read the book as well, and I hope they will.
All right, sure. Salvatore Babones, thank you for speaking to us on Focal Length. With that, it's a wrap on this episode of viewers. For more international news updates, stay tuned to NewsX World. Thank you.